whatever, it's falsifiability or proving. I won't get into that whole thing. The whole, it's kind of like an epistemological quagmire for non-specialists. But where you show mere compatibility, like if this theory, I have seen, you get a theory where if this theory is A, compatible with the data, and B, hold the line against medieval religion, or just because all religion is, medieval, then let's just go with it. Let's just call it science for now. Because it fulfills, it's compatible with the data, and it holds the line against metaphysical intrusions. So, I think we almost need something like epistemological disarmament. Epistemological disarmament, détente. Oh my God, I guess I'm dating myself, right? Détente. Anyway, imperialism. As we know in our culture, imperialism is definitely a pejorative word. This was not lost on George Lucas, the empire. And in Hollywood, basically, the bad guys are always the empire, and the good guys are always the people that are against empire and want a form of government remarkably like our own. So, epistemological imperialism. Think about that. Epistemological imperialism. The idea that you subjugate every other epistemology. It doesn't make for good science, it doesn't make for good religion. It doesn't make for good spirituality because it's actually loopy. It's just, it just doesn't get at the real nature of the world. So maybe I'll say a few words about that and then get to my prophetic utterances. I'm joking. But what I think we have to go. Just very, very briefly, because I don't want to go on too long. Do unto others you haven't done to you, and I never like long lectures. Almost everybody, however they declare themselves in, let's say, public academic environments, almost everybody in their real life believes, is convinced that there are real things in the world which are not physical. Such as, for example, I'll throw out a few metaphysical items. Justice. If you see someone or a group of people cruelly, mercilessly exploiting innocent people, maybe children, maybe old people, maybe whoever it is, how many people really in their, I don't know if I want to say something like their heart of hearts, but how many people really in the deepest level of their intuitive grasp, what you think reality is, how many people think that there's no such thing? Some guy just cruelly murdered a bunch of children. It's not really wrong. It's not really bad. We are genetically programmed. Evolution has simply programmed us to believe it's wrong because somehow or other, this actually is not even a good historical theory, this somehow or other that people who evolved to think that such acts of wanton cruelty are bad survive better than people that saw no problem with it. Whether that would actually be the case, whether, let's say, compassionate people actually would out-survive cruel people is, anyway. But in any case, how many people really believe that it's no such thing? There's nothing wrong. Hitler did nothing wrong. All he did wrong was bad military tactician, lost the war, forfeited the right to, write the history books. The only thing he did wrong was he lost. There's nothing wrong with genocide. How many people really believe that? How many people think when they look at their children or their spouse, with love, that it's really, this is just some kind of a chemical thing? Obviously, there are chemical things going on when you feel emotions. We know that. However, how many people think it can be fairly reduced? Just like you say 8/16 or 4/8. Yeah, my age, I gotta really think about this. What's the next? Okay, or 2/4 or 1/2. I mean, obviously, if you say 8/16 or 1/2, if you have 8/16 of the pie, or you have half the pie, you get the same number of calories. So how many people think that to say that it was bad, it was a terrible thing that this person murdered all these children, is exactly the same thing as saying that I'm genetically wired just to believe something, although there is no such thing as good or bad. I mean, how many people think those statements are really the same? There are two senses of the word reduce. You can reduce something by simply simplifying its expression. 2/4, 1/2. You can reduce something by actually diminishing it. So when we try to reduce all of reality, beauty, art, I mean this simple thing, how many people believe that there's a great work of art, something which has really moved civilization, that it's not the brilliant art historian that really understands the painting, it's the paint chemist. It's the paint chemist. Because the paint chemist is dealing with the real painting, and all this other metaphysical stuff like beauty and blah, blah, blah. We're just, evolution has wired us just to imagine those things. I mean, I think you can see that the kind of reduction that's going to take place in the world, if we just succumb to this, frankly, the absurd proposition. Empiricism is not absurd. It's actually very valuable. It's probably saved all of our lives in different ways. But the idea that it explains the epistemological empiricism, the idea that it explains everything, is absurd, because it doesn't. Equally absurd is the idea that if I want to know, let's say, anything about the physical world, I'm just going to get out my sacred text, and that's going to tell me everything I need to know. No. When I have some health issue, believe me, I don't go to a priest. Unless that priest happens to be an exceptionally good doctor. So, it's interesting because Descartes, in the 1600s, while Francis Bacon was kind of creating the empirical method, Descartes, also a powerful figure, was doing something almost the opposite. He was saying that the real, how should I put it, the ground, the core of certainty, the core of epistemological certainty is not studying the world, it's actually studying consciousness itself, it's going inward. So Bacon's going out, Descartes' going in. But in any case, what Descartes said is, okay, why don't we just one for you, one for you. It's like, religion or spirituality can talk about these things, and it was like a compromise, and science can talk about those things, and everybody's happy. No. Immediately, a bunch of sort of like, I don't know what you call them, and to me, they're just like these, great intellectual troublemakers. I think Descartes had common sense. He did not have a perfect understanding of science or religion or spirituality. It's not that the way he stated it was the absolute final draft of this reconciliation, but I think he had some common sense, which has been lost. And so I think the future, if we can somehow be rational, if we can somehow be reasonable and have common sense, and if we're not simply, let's say, addicted to quarreling and fighting because it's more fun to bash your enemies than to, be bored out of your mind by peace. And I mean, some people really like conflict. They think it's cool. So, but I think clearly science and spirituality they both have extremely important contributions to make. And if we can, what psychologists say, you have to, what do they say? Like transcending your own life history, if you get stuck in your own life history, you can't transcend it, you're stuck in the past. So I think we really, as a civilization, need not to be stuck in this sort of somewhat ugly past, this warfare between two very important ways of understanding reality. And I think we should move forward. That's, essentially what I think about it. So perhaps we could take any questions or comments you may have, and we'll go from there. We're in a talk show format. I'm just kidding. Yes, back there. Any questions? Did you have a question? No?
Yeah, I don't have a clear question, but since no one's asking, I'll try to put together a question, which is that in religions, one of the reasons that strikes me that they're opposed to sciences is not that denies the reality of what science discovers, but rather that it sees that science always has a motive to use those discoveries in ways that are damaging to the earth and damaging. You're saying that they've done a lot of things.
Well, again, but I've also said that science has good reasons to me, it's post-traumatic stress disorder, frankly. I mean, if you look at post-traumatic stress disorder, two of the main symptoms of it are, and they of course are closely connected. One is hypervigilance, because your nervous system has suffered trauma and you don't want another trauma. So therefore you become hypervigilant. You know, the typical cartoon example is that a car backfires and a combat veteran dies for cover. So, and because of that hypervigilance, there's a tendency toward withdrawal. As soon as anything looks like it might be that same thing, you withdraw. And so, again, I'd like to introduce another thing, and that is the sort of the dialectical view of history. If we can go back to Professor Hegel and his disobedient disciple Marx. Well, anyway, not really Marxism. But if you look at the whole notion of a historical dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and history moving in this way, the thesis would be, in this case, just the status quo, a traumatic set of historical facts in religion. If you come out of your cottage one day and you see right in the center of your little town that one of your neighbors being burned alive at a stake for relatively subtle theological mistakes, it can ruin your whole day. So, for example, the history of England, if you look at the trauma, look at the history of England, where you had Henry VIII, who was, my God, basically, anyway, the first person that translated the Bible into English. The first person that translated the Bible into English. Jesus, as we know, preached to common people. He was a printer. In the early days, printers would often write and translate because they needed stuff to print. He was killed for it. He fled to Holland, and almost like a Salman Rushdie case. He fled to Holland. After a while, he thought he was okay, came out in the open. Henry VIII sent secret agents to Holland, kidnapped him, dragged him back to England. He had a very quick trial and was executed. Why? Because he committed the subversive act of allowing people in general to read the Bible in England. So, if you look at the whole history, if you go into the Inquisition, I don't have to mention all these things. Everyone knows about these things. It's a very traumatic history. And I don't want to, I recognize that within that religious tradition, there were large numbers of very good, very decent, very sincere, pious, admirable people. I'm not saying there were many extraordinarily good people. Sincere people, spiritually minded people. But in the midst of that civilization, there were a set of extremely traumatic events. And the civilization reacted against it. And it's still reacting. And also religion. And so it's kind of like, trauma breeds trauma. They say abusers, or the abused become the next generation of abusers. That's a very tragic but apparently true fact in this world. And so you get the traumatized becoming the next, what's the agent verb here? Traumatizers, that's it. Agent now, sorry. Anyway, you get so the traumatized become the next generation of traumatizers. The abused become the abusers. So first, we're going to kick you out of your university, out of our universities. Okay, now we're going to kick you out of our universities. Now we've taken them. And there's something very childish about this, and actually very obscurantist, because it really impedes the impartial pursuit of knowledge. One last thing, just a plug for the home team here, and that is, there's a cliche in our civilization that religion has caused most of the wars. I mean, whether that's historically true or not, a lot of people say that. There are other parts of the world, even the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, in treating science and religion, says we're just going to look at religions that came from the Middle East. Which in a sense may have been simply an honest and integrity, because maybe that's what we know about, although they did make a great effort to get experts in other religions. But in any case, I would compare the situation in India. If you look at Vedic or Hindu, which is sort of an anachronistic term, it's a fairly modern term, but if you look at the history of religion in South Asia, let's say, in some ways, it resembles the history of religion in the classical Greco-Roman world. In that people certainly fought wars, politicians and kings, they certainly fought wars. Romans almost never met a war they didn't like. However, what you don't find, if you read the Roman historians, what you don't find is like something which is really a religious war. It's not that the Romans, let's say, conquered Gaul, or they, just became fascinated by the idea of grabbing England, and of course they wanted to conquer the Persian Empire, and they wanted North Africa, and they even fantasized about conquering India, and they had grand and grandiose dreams about what they might. But I've never read in a Roman historian. I mean, Plutarch, of course, was Greek, but he was part of the Roman world. If you read Plutarch, if you read Tacitus, and the other Roman historians, they never say and then they went to Gaul to bring them Jupiter, because they did not know Jupiter. They just don't talk about it. They know exactly what they want: power and money. And so again, this politicizing, this militarizing of religion is, I think, culturally a very unfortunate thing that happened. So if we can depoliticize it, demilitarize it, I think we can actually talk to each other. And if you look at the history of South Asia, for instance, just give one example, and then you want to ask them. Just to give one example, look at the rise of Buddhism in South Asia. Buddhism arose in South Asia when the ancient Vedic culture had become somewhat, even in its self-descriptions as it began to reinvent itself, had become somewhat of an unresponsive monopoly. This is the only hardware store in town. You want a bag of screws? Pay the price. Not, drive 40 miles or pay more in gas. So it had become something of an unresponsive monopoly. And you had all these movements arising, like Buddhism, like Jainism, many other movements history didn't really record, but we know they were there because people sort of refer to them obliquely. And within the Vedic fold, you have sort of reform movements, like, for example, people who wrote Upanishads, but in any case, what I want to say is let's just look at Buddhism. We could look at other groups. Buddhism really defined itself as, to quote an old 7-Up commercial, the Uncola. It really defined itself as the un-Vedic culture. Because for various reasons, because the Vedic culture, they've kind of gotten bogged down in a hereditary caste system. And of course, Western people like to talk about the Indian caste system. Don't forget, the main difference is we had our Industrial Revolution sooner. And before the Industrial Revolution, we had very much had a hereditary caste system in the West, not in America. Well, anyway, it's another issue. So, but in any case, so you have this Buddhism rising and really in really the strongest possible terms repudiating, making the most trenchant criticisms of the sacred culture of the land they're in. But they didn't fight a war over it. They certainly, let's say, they battled philosophically, and they battled for the hearts and minds of the people of South Asia. They certainly tried to offer better services and products, like, we were more responsive to your needs. We're there when your grandmother died, we were there for you, or our position makes more sense, it's more logical. I mean, they certainly competed, but they didn't actually go to war over it in almost all cases. I mean, there's always an exception, but in general, it's a very strong general truth that they didn't actually go to war over it. They could actually just discuss it. So it is possible for science and religion to debate each other, just as in religion they debate, within science they debate. It's actually possible, and there are many conferences now, so I think we have to restore, frankly, again, roughly speaking, restore the pagan situation, which is depoliticizing, demilitarizing the pursuit of knowledge. And letting intelligent people just talk to each other and come to a conclusion. You don't have to stigmatize and you don't have to ban from universities, religious people or scientific people. You can just, why not, let the free market of ideas, let the civilization discuss and talk without this highly politicized thing, where you can lose your career if you say the wrong thing. Anyway, so I think we do have a model in this ancient Vedic culture. We do have a model of a civilization in which there was freedom. Remarkable. If you look at Bhagavata, for example, the ancient historical text of India, people could go into the town square, whatever they called it then, and just really criticize the king. You find this in Mahabharata. You find this in the Bhagavatam. People could, and it wasn't off with their heads. People could choose their religion. People could criticize the king in public. There's not the slightest hint of retaliation. So, I mean, there are models, a type of freedom which carried over not only in political things, religious things, and in discourse, all kinds of debates. So, I'm sorry, this gentleman, you want to ask a question?
Yes. My question is that in many ancient religious traditions, such as Judaism, you have a vast supernatural events, such as God parting the Red Sea and killing the firstborn of Egyptians. And in, let's say, Vedic culture, there are also many vast supernatural events, such as the psychic powers. So today we see that there are not as many supernatural events which pervade today's society and can be captured by video camera and other means which are available today. Do you think this fact lends credence to the empiricist idea that ancient mythologies can be explained naturally?
Good question. And what would I say? First of all, I'll say that if you read ancient histories, supernatural events were not necessarily the order of the day. They were quite sporadic, and people, I mean, there were periods described actually in ancient texts where people could go through their whole lives and not see a supernatural event. That's just the first thing I'm going to say. That's not like, okay, I addressed your question. That's just one point. Another point is that, I mean, obviously, someone could say, well, if there really is a God that does supernatural things, just show up and do something, and then we'll stop giving you a bad rap. And if you don't show up, don't expect us to take all these things seriously. So, from the science side, you can construct a skeptical theory about religion. I should also say that from the religious side, or simply the non-science side, you can construct a skeptical theory of science. By saying that practically every scientific theory that ever was put forward has been refuted, replaced by another theory. And so therefore, it seems to be extremely probable that what we now think is true, I mean, not everything, I really believe there's such a thing as gravity and so on, But all kinds of, let's say, higher order theories, that so many things we think are true will turn out to be not true. And so there really are grounds for skepticism. Now, another point I want to make is that although sacred texts, as you pointed out, like the Bible or certainly the Sanskrit texts, do talk about supernatural events, what's interesting is that these events, at least in the Sanskrit literature, are not in and of themselves to be considered to be spiritual or religious events. And we have to remember that the dichotomy, which is so powerful in our civilization between science and religion, didn't exist back then. And therefore, when they talk, let's give a typical example from a genre of Sanskrit text called the Puranas. Puranas means ancient, the ancient stories. That a yogi, let's say, had powers and did something like, let's say, could transform his or her physical features, or could inflict a mortal curse on someone. These powers and these stories are not considered religious. They're actually considered to be more just history. And so, because these ancient texts were not, look at the Bible, even the Bible, for example, although the Bible obviously comes out of a civilization which centered itself more or less in different historical periods on a single God, whom they conceived of in various ways, it's clear in the Bible that the intention often is simply historiography. And they believe that certain things actually took place historically. It gets into the point that, for example, in fact, in the Stanford, again, I'm referring to Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the article on science and religion makes a very interesting point. And that is that someone can believe in, let's say, supernatural beings or powers, but be very unreligious, in fact, anti-religious. And often that's the case in these ancient texts. What if, for example, a person believes that there is some kind of God, some kind of very powerful being, but that I hate it, and I have absolutely, or her, or them, or it, and I have absolutely no intention of worshiping this being, and I would rather die than take part in a worship ceremony, or in any way offer faith or allegiance. So philosophically, can you really call that a religious attitude? It's really not. In fact, it's an attitude that despises religion and yet believes in the existence of certain things. So, in general, the picture we get in these ancient civilizations, whether it's Homer, whether it's the Puranas, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Song of the Volsungs, the Scandinavian Homer, basically, it's a picture of a cosmic village. It's a picture of a cosmic village. We talk about a global village. There is a picture of a cosmic village. And a picture of certain intercourse between higher and lower beings, between humans and other beings. And an intercourse which is very interesting. Thousands of years, I think you could say, well, two, right? More to the plural. Thousands of years before the scientific revolution, you find in Homer, you find in Hesiod, you find in the Puranas, you find in all these ancient literatures the declaration that the age of this cosmic or universal intercourse has ended. But it's and this is not just like an obvious excuse, because again, they say these things thousands of years before it became an issue. It's not that they were like prophetic. I don't believe they were prophetically seeing that in the future there will be a conflict between science and religion, and people on the science side will make these arguments, and therefore let us preemptively make these statements. No, I mean, I really don't think Homer was foreseeing MIT or Stanford physics department. And yet they made that the universe, the world, goes through different stages, or the inhabited worlds that we're aware of, go through different stages, and the age of this interplanetary intercourse is ending. That doesn't prove it's true. However, what it does prove is that there's a consistency. There's a certain coherence in this picture of the world. Now, in this age, the age we live in now, what at least I know my own spiritual teacher has emphasized, and it made sense to me personally, it's just, me, that the most important supernatural transformation or supernatural event for me is the, I don't know what you call it, extreme makeover of my consciousness. And frankly, before I began my spiritual practice, 43 years ago, when I was minus 4 years old. I mean, at that time, I was, I guess I was a hedonist. I was a young guy in California. Of course I was out of control. But the transformation that I experienced, what happened to my consciousness, and experiences I've had, I cannot rationally explain to myself or anyone else in any other way than to say that my experiences corresponded to objects that exist in the real world, which are not merely empirical, metaphysical objects, such as a soul or God, or a self, if the word soul has baggage for you personally. A self and some type of power in the universe. Of course, I have specific ideas about that, but for now, just generally, power in the universe, which is not a creation of human projection. The term projection, by the way, okay, because you're a person, you think God is a person, the word projection is used philosophically in extremely sloppy ways. And one of the reasons there's so much sloppiness in the types of arguments that are made against spirituality is that it's the sloppiness, again, of the monopoly. Because in an academic world, whether it's Stanford or Harvard or anywhere, the public universities sometimes even try harder because they, anyway. In a, let's say, respectable academic environment today, if you are skeptical, in the traditional, historical Western notion of the term skepticism, if you are skeptical about metaphysical things, your skepticism is intellectually respectable, even if you cannot give good reasons for it. If you just say, I don't believe all that stuff, that is intellectually respectable. You don't have to explain yourself. However, if you are a person of faith, that is not intellectually respectable unless you can give extremely good explanations, and even then it probably won't work. It's not intellectually respectable. So consider it. Let's do a very brief little bit of linguistic anthropology here. In our culture, we have a cliche. It's a cliche because it's been said so many times. A cliche term, which is blind faith. Blind faith. Everyone's heard the term, right? Now, logically, epistemologically, it is quite obvious, in fact, it's practically self-evident, that in your pursuit of objectivity, unless you're anti-objectivity, let's say in your pursuit of knowledge to the best of your ability, you can go off the rails by believing something that's not true or disbelieving something which is true. Disbelieving true things can cost you your life, like refusing effective medical treatment, or disbelieving a trained psychiatrist who tells you that no, this really is California, and no, you really aren't Pompeius Muggs. So, disbelieving true things is just as dangerous in the pursuit of truth as believing a false thing. And therefore, if our civilization was balanced, we would have two cliches. Blind faith, blind doubt. If we were epistemologically balanced, but we're not. Just as in the Middle Ages, and even way past the Middle Ages, in universities, completely controlled by a particular religion, doubt was not intellectually respectable, only faith was. So you find all kinds of treatises and all kinds of learned discourses showing how ridiculous doubt is, but praising faith. So again, dialectic, I mentioned dialectic, we need to move forward. Dialectic means, let's say a successful dialectic in my view is, there's a thesis, there's an antithesis, take the best of both and form the synthesis. Let's move forward. Let's balance ourselves. Skepticism, if you deny a metaphysical claim, you are making a religious claim. If you deny a religious claim, you're making a religious claim. That's why, of course, atheism is a religious position. For example, let's say I write out an algebraic equation, and you're my algebra teacher, and you say, wrong. You're making an algebra claim. If I write it out and you say right, you're making an algebra claim. In a spelling bee, if the judge says right or wrong, it's a spelling claim. In the realm of religion, if you try to show the reason, for example, these poor Greeks and other pre-philosophical, pre-science people, well, I mean, the Greeks weren't pre-philosophical, pre-scientific people, the reason they believed in Zeus and all that stuff is because they saw thunder and lightning, it scared them, and therefore they imagined that there was some person who controlled thunder and lightning that they could appease, placate, propitiate, and so on and so forth. Now, was anyone here has anyone here been like hypnotically regressed and personally saw that dramatic moment in which the first Greek did that? In which the first Greek actually said, I'm really scared, I hope someone's up there, and if you are, please don't strike me dead with a lightning bolt. If anyone like was hypnotically regressed and saw that, please raise your hand. So, if you state, and I've heard this many times in university, if you state that the reason that they worship Zeus is because blah, 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 that's a religious claim. If you stand up in a university and say, Zeus exists, Zeus is the god of thunder and lightning, that's a religious claim. And if you say Zeus is not the god of thunder and lightning, if you say that, no, you can reduce this down to, socio-psychological, blah, blah, blah. That's equally a religious claim. If you mark my algebra equation right or wrong, you're still claiming to know algebra. That's an algebra claim. Every attempt to deny religious claims by kind of like these naive references to psychology and sociology and whatever, neurology, these are religious claims. So, in a public university in this country, you can advocate religion as long as you advocate it negatively. You want some water? I have an open water right here. It is okay in public universities in this country to teach religion in the classroom if you teach it negatively. And if you teach it positively, well, it's like hit the road, Jack. So what we're calling for is fairness, epistemological balance, sanity, and a restoration of a unified, or at least peaceful, pursuit of knowledge in all its different areas. And I hope that happens. I hope what I'm saying is prophetic, actually. So, yes, anything else, please?
I mean, maybe this is too simplistic of you, but I mean, ultimately, it seems to me that the common currency of spirituality and science is faith.
Is faith.
It's faith. I mean, you drop an apple and it falls to the ground 9 times out of 9, and so you believe 10th time I do it, it'll still drop. But at some level, it's just faith, because you can't really explain gravity down to its totally fundamental elements, and even then there'll be things that you don't know. I mean, science seems to have, it's an evolving thing and it's great, but it seems to have so much limitation.
Well, according to formal logic, the nature of induction, because obviously criticism is based on induction, the nature of induction is the conclusion always claims more information than the premises. For example, let's say I've studied 1,000 horses and they all have 4 legs, other than ones that were, obviously some horses they were born with problems, but let's say I studied 1,000 horses and they were all relevantly, anatomically simple, put it that way.